All right, I will be praying.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't turn on my camera. The internet signal is poor. All right, so let us agree in prayer. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks again for all that you have done for us, Lord, regardless of the challenges. You have always been faithful and you have always been helping us to pull through. And Lord, here we have another meeting and we present it into your hands, into your care. And we ask God that this meeting will be fruitful, it will be productive, informative, and that we will all have a wonderful time. I give you thanks for hearing our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. So thank you, Denise. So here today we have Miss Alexis Duggan, who is from the Global Student Psychology Committee. Miss Duggan is a student disability case manager at Texas A&M Commerce. She received her master's degree in counselor education with a focus in vocational rehabilitation and mental health counseling at the Florida International University. She received her bachelor's in special education at the University of North Florida, where she has a special education, where she was a special education teacher for 5 years. She's currently enrolled in the higher educational doctoral program at the Texas A&M University Commerce. It is her goal to help adults and adolescents with disabilities to gain independence and to improve their living resources and reach their career aspirations. Her passion is to serve individuals with disabilities and to assist them in living their best life. She believes that the disability population is often overlooked and left out of mainstream society, which is why she has chosen to be an advocate for individuals with disabilities. She believes students with disabilities deserve to be treated with respect and provided with appropriate resources. Over the past few years, she has had the opportunity to travel across the country to participate in several different conferences that focus on improving the ability to obtain suitable and meaningful employment for individuals with disabilities through research. Each of these professional learning opportunities has allowed her to provide a sense of professionalism, diversity, and current relevant knowledge to the wonderful field of rehabilitation counseling. It is her belief that through this program, she will be able to increase her knowledge and experience so that she can better serve the disabled community. She's a current student disability case manager at Texas A&M University Commerce, certified rehabilitation counselor, and a licensed professional counselor associate. She thoroughly enjoys working with the disability community and looks forward to sharing her expertise with you. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here from the Global Student Psychology Committee, please help me make welcome Miss Alexis Duggan. Miss Alexis, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Javario. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about you or to talk about students who have Down syndrome. And I'm especially excited to talk with you all about this because I do have some Caribbean heritage. My dad and his family is from Guyana. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today. So I'm going to share, or can I share my screen? It says the host disabled participant screen share.
Najani Denise, are you here? Can you make Miss Alexis co-host, please?
Yeah, give us a moment, please. We're still having some issues. Javario, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Try it now. Try it now. We do apologize, Miss Duggan. We're having some challenges with the devices and the connectivity.
That's okay, and I think you can just like click by my name and it should give you like a menu next to it. If you go to more on like the side of my name. Okay, there it is. Perfect. Okay, so can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Miss Duggan.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to be talking about Disability 101 Down syndrome. And basically we're going to be looking at how we can expand our knowledge about individuals who do have Down syndrome. So today's agenda is going to look like the following. What is Down syndrome? Some characteristics and challenges. What does employment look like for those individuals, and coping mechanisms for caregivers as well. So Javario has already talked a little about me and my background. I do currently work at a university here in Texas, and I am a student disability case manager. So what that means is that I assist students in making sure that they have equal access to our curriculum or to all curriculum from the different laws that we have here in the state surrounding that. So that is the ADA. And then that is also Section 504 as well, and the Rehab Act of 1973. So previously I was a special education teacher, and I work with a lot of disabilities. I did work with students on the spectrum down in Miami, and right next to our classroom, we had students who had Down syndrome. So I also got a lot of experience with that as well. So I'm very excited to be here to talk to you all. And then I have a photo of me, a headshot where I'm smiling and looking at the camera. You may notice that I may narrate some of the photos here for anybody who may be visually impaired. So what is Down syndrome? Down syndrome is a genetic disorder that results in an extra or a copy of chromosome 21. Some types include trisomy 21, mosaic, and translocation. So depending on how that chromosome is copied, that's going to describe the type of Down syndrome that that person may have. You may notice some physical characteristics such as a flattened face, small head, short neck, or slanting eyes. Sometimes intellectual disabilities may be common among this population. Language may be delayed, and then sometimes the short term and the long term memory may be affected. So when I was in undergrad, at the University of North Florida, I did a lot of work with Best Buddies. So Best Buddies is like a peer support program for individuals with all types of disabilities, where you may be placed as a friend or as a mentor with someone who has a disability. So this was that. So the photo that you see here is me and my best buddy at the time. And we were on the boardwalk, and I believe that we were doing some outdoor activity. I think we may have been canoeing that day. So that is me and her standing on the boardwalk, and we're both smiling at the camera. Now, there may be some challenges based on various age groups, but the interesting thing here is that the challenges among individuals with Down syndrome and the challenges among anybody else who doesn't have a disability, there's not really a big difference between the two. Now, there may be some behaviors that last longer or that start at various ages. And then they may kind of start much later as well. So those are some things that you may notice. So one of those behaviors would be wandering or running off. So I remember when I was a teacher, um, and we had a student who kind of would always just seem to get away. Like no matter what we were doing, that student was always like not with us. So it's important, whether this student may be an adult or or a regular adolescent, it is important to have those visual signs and those reminders to, let somebody know where you're going so we know where you are. So that's a good safety thing. There may be some oppositional behavior, but that would be with anyone, whether they have a disability or not, but particularly in school, sometimes with certain tasks are presented, you may notice some different oppositional behaviors. So that could just be presenting a set of directions that may not be as explained as clearly, or that could be maybe presenting a task that may not be on that student's level. You may also notice some obsessive compulsive behaviors, so some very rigid behaviors or high frequency behaviors. So maybe they have to wash their hands more than once. Maybe they have to just sit in this chair and nobody else can sit in that chair. Maybe they stand up and then they sit down and then have to stand up and sit down again. Those are some examples of some behaviors that you may notice that they may be at a higher frequency. That's mainly in younger children. And then as these individuals grow, learn different things, and those behaviors may subside. Now, so what does communication look like? So communication is always very important when working with individuals with disabilities. That's something that I'm always very aware of. Is, am I communicating clearly? Does what I'm saying make sense? Is it right to the point? Not going all around in a big circle. Am I giving a clear set of directions? That's something that I really learned as a teacher, is how to communicate effectively with individuals with disabilities. Now, communication strategies, social skills can be characterized as the following, and I'll read them in a second, but sometimes you may notice that speech may be difficult to understand, and that's really just based on the oral structure. So maybe because sometimes the individuals who do have Down syndrome, you may notice a protruding tongue, or or just their facial features may make it a little difficult to really understand what they're saying. So as a result, some speech and language therapy may be required. So as a teacher, a lot of our students would have services from an SLP where they would just learn how to enunciate more clearly, and then just regular communication strategies as well. So I want XYZ, I need XYZ. I don't want to do, XYZ. So just making sure that those social skills were in place. Now, social skills can be characterized really as the same as their non-disabled peers. So that is really a strength in this population. I know for me personally, I'm working as a teacher and then working with best buddies. Communication was never really something that was lacking. That was always a strong point in our students with Down syndrome. They were very sociable, very outgoing, very engaging, very affectionate. Um, some studies may show that some of these individuals can be similar to or can have social skills that are similar to those students on the spectrum. So that would look like maybe some issues with the social style communication. Of course, that's not for all students, but that is one of the things that the research does point out. So here I have a picture of me and two friends. So this is from a Best Buddies prom. So I actually have on my prom dress here, and they have on their prom dresses. And we are smiling at the camera, being very sociable and having a great time. I think I definitely went home and I was sweaty and my feet were hurting. We danced all night. Now, I have to talk about person first language when speaking about or to individuals who have any type of disability. So, this was something that was created here at our university, and it is disability terminology and practice. So, whenever we're talking about anybody who has a disability, it's important to remember that they are a person outside of a disability and they are a person first. So we do want to use person first language. So we want to put the person first and then their disability last, even if we even mention their disability at all. So it's very important to remember that all individuals have an identity, and that identity is going to be separate from any type of disability. Um, that they have. So it gives some examples here. So person first language will look like a person with a disability. Identity first language or how we identify individuals who have disabilities. First off, that should always be done with pride. So, disability is not a bad thing. We have to be prideful and respectful of that identity. So if we were saying something, if we were using person first language, we say person with a disability. If we were talking about identity first language, then we may say a disabled person. So of course, there are some things that can be seen as offensive. Of course, we never say the R word. So that is something that is very offensive and inappropriate when referring to individuals with disabilities. We may not say that that person is bound to a wheelchair because for someone who does not have the use of their legs, a wheelchair could be seen as very liberating for that person to help them to get around. So if you're unsure on how to refer to somebody who has a disability, ask them, would you prefer I say this or how do you like to be identified? So let's always put that person first and just kind of keep in the forefront of our thinking the types of disability terminology that is appropriate. Now, some career options. So I am a certified rehabilitation counselor. So that means that I help individuals with disabilities to obtain suitable and meaningful employment. So many years ago, we would see, individuals who have disabilities, whether it's Down syndrome or whatever, those people were not being given the opportunity to go to work. And what says that they can't work because they have a disability? That's not a good reason. So individuals with this individuals with Down syndrome are able to work in the community with their non-disabled peers, so with people who don't even have disabilities. They may need some resources like job coaching, some state resources as well, and then flexible employers. So in case you didn't know, the month of October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and that's where this graphic comes from. So the theme for this month or for this year is America's Recovery Powered by Inclusion. So as we know, COVID really snatched the ability for a lot of people with disabilities to work. And then there were a lot of accommodations that people with disabilities were asking for, like remote work, that was always denied, but COVID came and those things were automatically given to everybody. So things that people with disabilities had been fighting for as far as suitable employment for years, those things just kind of automatically happen with COVID. So it leads us to think, could these things have always been in place for people with disabilities? Yes, they could have. So some types of career options for individuals with Down syndrome, competitive employment. So what that means is that the employment is not specific to individuals who may have Down syndrome or who may have any other disability. It could be a regular office job. It could be a regular outdoors type of employment. The competitive employment just means that it's not just for people with disabilities. Sheltered employment could also be an option. So depending on how severe the person may be, sheltered employment may be a good option for them. So what that looks like is that there will be other people with disabilities. They will be monitored. So they have like a supervisor right there with them throughout the whole day. They be provided with a set of instructions, visuals on how to complete that task. The hours most likely may be modified. Sheltered employment is kind of one of those things that we do want to stay away from as much as possible because individuals with disabilities deserve to have employment opportunities with everyone in the community. And then they also deserve to be fair, to be paid as well, and to be paid a fair and equal wage. Sometimes sheltered employment does not provide those opportunities. Volunteer work. So volunteer work is still out there as well. I did a lot of work with Special Olympics, and a lot of the volunteers were people with disabilities. So volunteer work is always an option as well, just to build those basic work skills. And then vocational rehabilitation. So like I said earlier, I am a certified rehabilitation counselor. My master's had a focus in vocational rehab and then mental health counseling as well. So vocational rehabilitation basically is a federal / state funded program that works to get individuals with disabilities employed. So they provide services like job coaching, skill building, training, or extra schooling. And those wraparound services really help individuals with disabilities, whether they are severe, moderate, whatever, to obtain suitable and meaningful employment. So not just anything, something that means something to that person and that they want to do and that they can stay in and make a living on it as well. So I want to ask you, drop down in the chat and let me know any challenges that you think may arise for someone who has Down syndrome on the job. So what are some challenges that you think that may come up for someone who has Down syndrome who is trying to find a career? Drop in the chat and let me know. Any challenges that you think they may have. And I can't see the YouTube, so if you're leaving a comment on the YouTube, I can't see it. But if you're in the Zoom, then you can drop any challenges that you think someone on the spectrum may have. Okay, name calling. So maybe individuals not respecting the person first language, the identity first language, the boundaries that are there. Yeah, because we do have individuals who have inappropriate views on people with disabilities, whether it's Down syndrome or not, and then being able to work. And then another interesting fact is that there's research surrounding that individuals with disabilities are your most reliable employees, loyal, they come to work, they do their job just as well as anybody else. You know, there's no research saying that it's the opposite of that. But yeah, there are some other challenges may also be, you know, flexible employers. So there was just a case here, I can't remember the state, but it was with Walmart, and a young lady with Down syndrome, her schedule was changed after like 20 something years. And she was having a lot of negative reactions to that. She was panicking. She was scared that she wouldn't be able to get to work, and she was fired because of that. They did not take into account her disability. They were not flexible, and she was just awarded a very large sum of money because of that. And hopefully that company will put some things in place that will educate just their workers on how to collaborate with individuals with disabilities. So flexible, non-flexible employment, not looking at accommodations for individuals who need employment, who have Down syndrome, having, you know, person first language not being a thing, the workplace not being diverse, the discrimination against their physical appearance, most definitely, you know, kind of having this thought in your head that, oh, you can't do X, Y, Z, or why are you even here, you know, with me? Yeah, those are some challenges. There's something called the Job Accommodation Network. We call it JAN. I believe it's jan.org. It is a free resource and it gives a lot of different accommodations for individuals with various disabilities. So they have a library. You could click on Down syndrome and you could see a lot of the accommodations that should be in place for someone who has Down syndrome. Yes, they are not considered as normal. And then what is normal, right? Yeah, so just those inappropriate views are some of the challenges that may come up. That's why job coaching is very important so that you can have that middleman just kind of in between to start those conversations, to fix those different views in the workplace. That's why a certified rehabilitation counselor is very important to make sure that discrimination um, is not happening and that individuals with disabilities are being provided with that suitable, with that equitable employment. Now, so here are some caregiver tips. Being a caregiver is hard. So whether it's a person with a disability, whether it's a person, who acquired a disability, being a caregiver is very difficult. Here are some important steps for you to just increase your ability to be the best caregiver that you can be. So be patient with yourself, right? Nobody knows everything, and it's okay to mess up. Create a support system. So who can you go to when you're feeling stressed, when you need some more answers, when you need some type of assistance? Create your support system. Take care of your physical health and your mental health. If you're not taking care of your physical and mental health, then how can you be a caregiver? You may have to step away from that position if those things are not taken care of. And then many caregivers are the only person who can be a caregiver at that time. So your physical and mental health is most important. So that may look like making sure that you go to your annual doctor's appointments and not just, rubbing it out or just kind of forgetting about it. Making sure that you are speaking to a therapist, that you are going to counseling, maybe practicing some mindfulness techniques. So deep breathing, closing your eyes, recentering yourself. Don't forget what's important. So what is the ultimate goal here? It's to provide that person with love and knowledge, with a fair chance, just like everyone else. So don't forget that. Always remember your why. When things do get rough, take a deep breath, step away and recenter yourself and then try it again. So these are just a few tips, and I actually got these tips from the National Association of Individuals with Down Syndrome. They had a lot of great tips on their website. Now, as I'm finishing up here, are there any questions? And you can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Okay, so if there aren't any questions, thank you, Joshua. So if there aren't any questions, thank you. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to be here to present to you all. If you want to keep in touch with me, I am on YouTube. I know my last name is Duggan. I have a lot of helpful videos where I talk about different educational topics. I talk about individuals with disabilities. So be sure to subscribe and check me out over there. I also have a blog, DugganDigsDisability.org, where many of my videos, I always do a blog write-up on them. So you can check me out over there as well. And this is a photo of me and my two friends from Best Buddies. We were on a trip to Disney World there in Florida. And that is us smiling at the camera in our Best Buddy shirts with Mickey hats and hearts surrounding it. And then there is a castle behind us. So any other questions? And if there aren't any other questions, thank you all so much again. And thank you, Javaria.
Thank you so much, Ms. Duggan, for that illuminating presentation. It really means a lot. Thank you so much for taking the time out, especially for coming here and educating us on Down syndrome. We have really learned a lot. And if you would be so kind as well to leave your email in the chat, just in case anybody has any additional questions that they could reach out to you as well.
Okay, yes, so I just left my email in the chat, duggan138@gmail.com.
Okay, thank you once more, Ms. Duggan. It is really appreciated. Guys, moving right along into our other segment on ADHD. This segment is by Miss Katie Robinson, who we welcome in her absence. Miss Robinson is a fourth-year doctoral candidate in counseling psychology at the University of Georgia, Athens in the United States. Katie is currently completing her predoctoral internship at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children in Richmond. With a focus in child psychology, Katie's primary clinical research and advocacy interest centers around child and adolescent well-being through counseling, testing, education, and community support. Ms. Robinson is also a registered drama therapist and uses creative interventions in her work with youth and families. In addition to professional interests, Ms. Robinson also enjoys spending time with her husband and dog. She also enjoys cooking, reading, acting, and singing. Ladies and gentlemen, here to share with us on ADHD. She has sent a pre-recording. Please make welcome in her absence, Miss Katie Robinson.
Hi, everyone.
Afternoon, everyone. Are you guys able to hear? Or are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, we're hearing Tashika.
Okay, great. I'm gonna go ahead. All right.
My name is Katie Robinson, and I am a doctoral candidate in counseling psychology at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, in the United States. It's really wonderful to be with you today, and I so appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about a topic that continues to come up in my work as a psychologist in training who specifically focuses on working with children, adolescents, and families. Like I said, my focus has been working with children in my psychology training program so far. I'm currently completing my predoctoral internship at the Virginia Treatment Center for Children out of the Children's Hospital of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia, here in the United States. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about ADHD, try to broadly cover some of the concepts about ADHD to help us all understand it a little bit better, what it looks like, how it's diagnosed, and how it can differ in the experiences between childhood and adulthood, and a little bit about how people receive support when they have ADHD. So I'm calling this presentation ADHD, the basics, because we're going to cover a lot of really broad things today. And if you have kind of specific questions about ADHD, there are some really incredible resources available that I'll try to name at the end of the presentation as well. So what is ADHD exactly? As written here, it is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders that's diagnosed. A neurodevelopmental disorder is something that actually has to do with the development of your brain, which is why we see ADHD very commonly diagnosed in childhood. It doesn't mean that ADHD is only ever diagnosed in childhood, however. That's important to know. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. ADHD can absolutely be diagnosed among anybody across the lifespan. People with ADHD specifically have difficulties with some aspects of executive functioning, which I'm going to explain in just a moment. in thinking about this presentation, I realized that a lot of my knowledge about ADHD specifically has to do with norms and standards that are understood here in the United States. And in research that's been done here in the US, there's an estimation that 8.4% of children and 2.5% of adults have an ADHD diagnosis. But when I looked at this more globally, among non-North American populations outside of the US and Canada, the prevalence is only around 1%. And my hypothesis, and the hypothesis of a lot of practitioners in the field of psychology, other mental health fields as well as pediatricians, is that ADHD and other executive functioning difficulties are far more common than is documented. So I think there's a little bit more nuance to it than we sometimes think. In order to really understand ADHD, we need to understand what executive functioning actually is. So executive function is a set of mental skills that includes our working memory, flexible thinking, and self-control. We use these skills every day to basically do every task that we do during our day-to-day life. I once had a professor describe it as every step that you take in order to safely cross the street, right? You come up to the edge of the sidewalk, you use your head to move both ways. You've made the decision to look both ways. You made the decision to press the button, if you know, to alert the walk signal, to change it, to alert the other traffic or passersby. Then you use your feet to walk across the street. Every aspect of that was controlled by your executive function parts of your brain. So difficulties with executive functioning can make it hard to focus, make it hard to follow directions, can also make it hard to regulate our emotions, among lots of other things. I have heard executive functioning described as the management system of the brain. So it's kind of like our stage manager or our director, because the skills involved help us actually get things done. Our executive functioning skills begin to develop when we're very little, and develop through our adolescence, and actually aren't done developing until we're in our 20s. So I work with kids whose parents are maybe struggling to understand how they're navigating ADHD, excuse me. I often say, you know, not only is your kid's brain just not growing, but their executive functioning skills are still developing too, very specifically. So we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace when we're younger to be able to really understand that our brain is still growing and changing. So there are 8 different types of executive functions that I think are kind of specific to parse out, because some people with ADHD have difficulties with all 8, whoops. Or some people have, more particular difficulty with one or the other. So we have self-control, the ability to stop and think before acting. Self-monitoring, the ability to view and evaluate yourself. Emotional control, the ability to manage feelings, achieve goals, all of the things necessary in order to get something done when we feel it emotionally. Flexibility, the ability to adapt to change. Task initiation, the ability to start and finish a task without procrastinating. I know that one is very hard. Organization, the ability to develop and use systems to keep track of things, materials, information, anything like that. Working memory, the ability to use information held in your memory to complete a task. And last, planning and time management, which is the ability to create steps to reach a goal and be able to do that within a time frame. So those are our executive functions. Everyone has them, but you may even notice while you're looking at these, like, oh, this one I'm good at and this one I'm not good at. I think we all kind of have variable levels of strength or difficulty in certain executive functioning areas, especially for those of you who may be listening whose brains aren't done developing yet, especially if you're under the age of 25. But regardless, people with ADHD specifically struggle with several of these executive function abilities. And that can make it really challenging to sort of get stuff done, which is why you'll see a lot of people describe ADHD in some very specific ways. And I hope that you'll be able to see these. If not, if you're an Instagram user, these are from the account ADHD Actually, the wonderful Australia-based Instagram mental health professional who shares a lot of really cool content about ADHD. but several of these come from users on Instagram who have self-described their ADHD in a number of ways. And I just thought these were really interesting. A roller coaster to describe the ADHD mind, a fog, a beehive, a race car. There are several ways that the ADHD brain is described here that I think are really descriptive. A dog, excitable, curious, a radio station that hasn't fully come in, but you can hear 5 others trying to come through. A circus, an electrical storm, a hamster running on a wheel, a room full of trampolines, a movie on fast forward, trying to find the end of a tangled ball of yarn, swimming in a pool filled with jello, 7 weasels all trying to drive the same bus. That one gave me a chuckle, but I think, you know, I like to use humor to discuss and understand things, but I also think that these descriptions really give us a greater understanding of what it's like to exist in the mind of someone who has ADHD, who may struggle with some of those executive functions that I mentioned before. So how is ADHD actually diagnosed? I work here in the United States, and so we typically use the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, published by the American Psychiatric Association. But there's also an understanding that the International Classification of Diseases and Disorders, the ICD, is used to diagnose ADHD. So here's kind of a comparison of the criteria that need to be met in order for a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist to diagnose ADHD. So in someone younger than 6 years old, we're looking for very specific criteria. Someone between the ages of 6 and probably like the almost done developing brain, so 20 something, we're looking for something specific, and the adults themselves look a little bit different. So I'll let you take a look at this yourselves, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what all of this looks like in real life. When a person is getting evaluated to see if they have ADHD, there are several different ways to go about doing that. As a psychologist, I typically evaluate individuals seeking for difficulties focusing or sitting still, or hyperactivity or irritability or things like that that might come with executive functioning concerns. In several different ways. We want to look at the way that a person thinks, so their cognitive functioning, the way that they're doing in school or at work. So with kids, we're going to look at their academic ability and see if there's anything getting in the way of their academics. With an adult, we would look at things that might be getting in the way of them doing their job well, or might be obstacles for them in the workplace. And then we're also going to look at their emotional functioning, because like I mentioned before, emotion regulation is a big component of ADHD as well. So we're looking for 5 or 6 plus symptoms that may be present in order to meet criteria for a diagnosis of ADHD that would then be able to help a person get support, therapy or medication or accommodations at work or school. And a lot of these feel kind of what we might describe as quote unquote stereotypical of what we might understand about ADHD. So a rambunctious kid who has a hard time sitting still, or acts as if driven by a motor, having trouble holding attention to tasks, not following through on instructions, interrupting people, things like that. Those are characteristics of what we would describe as hyperactive type ADHD. So there's also inattentive type ADHD, which is maybe oftentimes looks a little bit more like a person who is kind of off in their own head. Maybe seems like they might be daydreaming, very easily distracted, maybe forgetful. So there are several different kind of ways like ADHD might quote unquote stereotypically present itself. There's also a lot of nuance to that. So I want to show you some of the more subtle signs. This is from the same creator, ADHD Actually, on Instagram. I just thought that they summed this really well. Some additional signs of hyperactivity might look like not being able to sit still while you talk on the phone. I don't know if that's relatable to anybody. I do that sometimes. Difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep, spinning around, just having a hard time sitting still in a chair, having racing thoughts, not being able to hold your hands still. Maybe you're a doodler. having kind of restless legs or restless bars, as well as some subtle signs of impulsivity, saying yes to plans before I check whether I'm free, skimming reading, skipping ahead to get to the exciting part, going to the store only for one thing, but leaving with a bunch of things because it's hard to just pick one thing, binge watching TV, starting a task without reading the instructions. Those are, some of those impulsivity signs that can sometimes coincide with ADHD as well. This creator's content is great if you are on Instagram. I have been a big fan myself. So when a person is coming to the doctor or coming to their therapist or coming to a psychologist for testing and says, here's what I'm struggling with. I can't pay attention. I have a hard time sitting still. My mind is always somewhere else. My thoughts are racing. I'm restless. I interrupt people. I don't know. I've given you my list of symptoms. And they say, okay, great. Based on all this data that I've collected about you, you have ADHD. What do you do about it? Right? Like, what's the next step? Treatment varies. Treatment looks different depending on your age and also depending on the symptoms that you're presenting with. In my work with young children, oftentimes ADHD that presents itself as sometimes difficulty with behavior. So maybe interrupting people or having a hard time sitting still, getting kind of upset when you don't get your way, when your emotions have a hard time regulating themselves, like running around, not paying attention. A lot of times we recommend behavior support. And that can look like behavior management therapy for a kid, as well as parent support to help them learn the strategies to provide that same kind of support and guidance at home. So they're not just having to do that with a therapist. So the standard is that if a child is 6 years or younger, that you try behavior management first. So kind of more traditional behavioral support like positive reinforcement, just setting structures and routines, and practicing emotion regulation skills between parents and kids or guardians and kids before you try medication, because a little bitty kid's brain is still so fresh and new that we want to try to support from a more therapeutic standpoint before we try medication, because medication has some side effects. So typically the side effects of medication are worth the choice to try a medication because it can be really supportive for a little kid. They often want to try to see if there are other supports that can be put in place first. And if that's not enough, it's okay. For so many kids 6 and older, the addition of medication can be incredibly supportive. And that's the same for adults too. There are various types of ADHD medication, and I certainly can't claim any expertise in the nuance and neurological and scientific and biological components of ADHD medication. But I highly recommend that you seek out different sources, scientific and scholarly sources, if that's something you're interested in learning more about, because ADHD medication has a lot of nuance and there are a lot of options these days. So adding in medication can sometimes be really, really supportive for a kid 6 and up, a teenager, an adult. And it's typically advised that you do that alongside other types of therapy support. So for a younger kid who's appropriate for medication, they'll often still really benefit from parent training in behavior management and behavioral support, sometimes just kind of traditional therapy too, because if we're having a hard time regulating our emotions, having a therapist is certainly going to be supportive to us, right? Same with adolescents. If an adolescent struggles with ADHD, they may want some therapy support to be able to just feel validated in that experience. Schools are also incredibly vital to the treatment and support for kids and teens with ADHD or college students with ADHD. And we'll talk a little bit about what those supportive accommodations look like in just a second. For adults, some adults, of course, are diagnosed with ADHD as children, and some adults find out much later that they might have ADHD. I know there was a big trend on TikTok for a while with adults talking about symptoms and experiences that they've come to understand might be executive functioning concerns or ADHD that slipped under the radar for a lot of their lives. That's not to say that everybody who struggles with executive functioning has ADHD, but it's certainly something that you can explore with the provider to learn more about yourself and what might support you. But in terms of adults, the treatment recommendations tend to vary depending on the person between medication, psychotherapy, education, or a combination of different types of treatments just to fit the person. ADHD support also looks really different. All of these answers are very subjective depending on the individual person. But overall, for children and adolescents, ADHD support tends to center around school-based accommodations. For school-aged folks, the accommodations really vary. So a lot of times with ADHD, you're still doing pretty well in school, themselves are not. That's not suffering, but you have a hard time sitting still in class. So you need a certain kind of chair to sit in, or you need to sit in a certain part of the classroom. Or when you have enough time to focus and a quiet space to work, you do great. But when you're put under really intense time conditions, you get really anxious and upset because it's hard to focus. So sometimes kids with ADHD will get supportive accommodations to have extra time to take tests or to sit in a quiet room without anybody bothering them, to feel a little bit less pressure and increased ability to focus. Sometimes kiddos also need tutoring because ADHD can sometimes coincide with some difficulties with areas of learning. And so generally, there's a lot of different supports that could be put in place, and those they tend to be crafted for the individual child. And those tend to be crafted by people at school. So someone might have identified that this needs some support at school, help plan, but sometimes we as psychologists can provide that kind of support too. And we make those recommendations for ADHD accommodations in school when we test for ADHD. When it comes to adults, the supportive accommodations can look really different and again are really, really subjective. For adults and older adolescents who work, workplace accommodations really vary. So here in the United States, we actually do have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and individuals with ADHD fall under this act, and as such do legally receive accommodations in the workplace. So an employer is legally obligated to create a workplace where a person can function well and do their job well when they request accommodations because they have ADHD. And I know that varies from place to place. But what typically happens is if a person discloses that they have a diagnosis of ADHD, then the employer is required by law to support them in ways that they're able to support them. They might not be able to, snap their fingers and change the world, but sometimes they could, support the environment. Maybe it's a different kind of lighting, or letting them bring their own chair to sit in, or helping them, create a workplace or workspace that works better for them. Helping a person have preferential scheduling. So if they are the best able to focus early in the morning, not letting them for the late night closing shift, offering frequent breaks, and just generally being open to managing that person's workload depending on what job they do. And this, of course, is totally going to vary between employer and workplace, and also what the individual person is willing to disclose, because we're certainly not responsible for telling everybody all our business, right? But if a person wants to disclose their diagnosis, then they may be able to receive supports, and those are just going to look different depending on what they need. Generally, I know I'm biased because I'm a psychologist, but across the lifespan, psychotherapy is incredibly beneficial for people with ADHD. Psychotherapy is beneficial for pretty much anybody. Again, like I said, I'm biased, but individuals with ADHD can sometimes experience more difficulties with self-esteem, with shame or guilt, when it comes to the difficulties that they have getting stuff done, getting motivated, putting forth the effort needed to complete tasks that can make you feel some type of way. Also interpersonal issues, overstimulation, so getting really overwhelmed by sound or smell or loud, I said sound, but loud noises, crowds, and just regulating emotions in general can really be supported by therapy. But like I said, I'm kind of biased. So overall, I've tried to give you the broadest overview of ADHD that I possibly could. But of course, if you have any additional questions, I will provide my email to the folks who I've coordinated this with, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I am by no means the be-all, end-all expert in ADHD. I just care a lot about helping kids and teens and families in any way that I can. And in a lot of ways, I do provide support for those kids, teens, and families who deal with ADHD on a daily basis. It's such a privilege to be able to do so. And it's such a privilege to be able to share what I know, what I've learned with other people. Certainly want to make sure I don't forget my references. These are just the starting points, truly, for all of the resources that are available when learning about ADHD and executive functioning. But there are so many additional ways to learn more. Like I said, if you are interested in talking further, I would be more than happy to speak with you. I will make sure that you are provided my contact information. And I thank you so very much for having me and for taking the time to listen. It's great to be able to spend some time on your screen, even though we won't be able to meet face to face. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. Once again, we thank Ms. Robinson in her absence for that eye-opening presentation. So to once again, to both Ms. Duggan and Ms. Robinson, we here at the University of the West Indies Mona Psychology Students Association would like to extend to you a gargantuan thank you for taking the time out to educate us on ADHD and Down syndrome and what they encapsulate, as well as some of your experiences. We wish you all the best going forward in your future endeavors, and we definitely look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Also, in the same breath, I also extend thanks once more to our visitors from the Global Student Psychology Committee for joining us today. It is always a pleasure having you here with us. Once again, guys, please remember to sign the register if you have not already done so. And once again, thank you, our members, for taking the time out to make it PSA, where we get psyched and stay psyched. We will definitely see you next week, where we have another fun-filled presentation planned for you. All right, with that being said, this is the end of our meeting. Thank you again, everyone, and do take care.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.